Hi guys, my name is Maeve and today I'm going to be showing you my literacy bag. So here's the outside of the bag. This is a donut embroidered on the front if you can't tell. But if you can't guess, my story is about donuts. The Whole Story of the Donut by Pat Miller. This is a really fun account of how the donut became what it is today. Very colorful and beautiful, and it just talks about Captain Hanson Gregory. That's the story, but I was faced with a little bit of a challenge because I'm a secondary ed person. At first glance, this does seem like a book that's a little bit lower level, but I decided to challenge myself and figure out how I could incorporate a book like this into a 6th grade lesson. So all of the stuff you'll see today are along the 6th grade standards. And one of the things that I really wanted to do in order to accomplish this was to bring in a paired article that was a little bit more complex in vocabulary and just in the way it presented the events, and kind of have students examine that and the details that you get about Captain Gregory from that, and then compare it to the picture book. So the first thing that I will show you guys is these couple of pages. This is their introduction, so I'll read it to you because this is the first thing students would get. It says, "Hello 6th graders, welcome to the tastiest literacy bag ever. Today's lesson and activities are all about donuts. Our lesson is inspired by the story about how donuts were invented. Luckily for us, they turned the story into a children's book. So for an easy introduction to the event, you will first read The Whole Story of the Donut by Pat Miller. After you've looked at the picture book, you will also read a paired article that discusses the history of donuts. Follow the guide to annotate that article before moving on to complete all of the reading, writing, and other activities in this bag." So then I have a page about all of the different ingredients of the literacy bag. And then we have a thing about the standards where they can read like what standards are specifically addressed in multiple activities. So the first thing I want to talk about is the retail activity. This is probably the most hands-on thing that I have in my literacy bag, but for this activity, students are just arranging the events on the cards in the order that they occurred in the story. There are about 6 different cards here, and students would just reorganize them in a way that is in line with the events of the story. And next I have just a whole packet full of activities to do. So I'm just going to explain each one briefly. So we have a summary activity. This summary activity comes right after they read the story. They basically just choose 3 to 5 events from the timeline that they think are important overall, and then they explain how the author introduces that detail through just the text or through the illustrations on the page. Kind of goes in line with the retail activity. There's also a vocabulary activity because even though this is a picture book, some of the words are pretty specific to the ocean and ships because Captain Gregory was a sailor. So what you're probably all wondering is about the paired text. What did I choose? I chose this article. This is actually an excerpt from an article that I found on JSTOR. I looked through it and made sure that the vocabulary wasn't too difficult for a 6th grader to understand. There's definitely some things that they might not know depending on where that student is. Basically, this just goes over 2,000 years of history of the donuts. The first known appearance of something like a donut actually comes from the Bible, and it goes all the way to Captain Gregory and talks about him. And several of the events that occur in the story that students read actually are discussed in this text. So I thought that was a really good way for students to see that how a journal article that's informational and a picture book that's informational can talk about the same thing, but how those things are presented a bit differently. The annotating guide, I'll just go ahead and say, just has them write some thinking notes. So they will write question marks in the margin when they're confused. They will underline the ideas, facts, or opinions that connect to something previously learned. They circle important words, and they star interesting ideas. My biblical integration is actually referring to what I just talked about with the first known occurrence or the first known mentioning of something like a donut actually occurs in Leviticus. So based off the paired article, they then are pointed towards the Bible, and it has them read that verse that references a donut. So then I have a little section down below that kind of explains. It says the Hebrew people in the Bible believed in making sacrifices to God. Since Leviticus is a book in the Old Testament, we know this was written before the time of Jesus Christ, when it was still custom to sacrifice and make offerings. Reasons for sacrifice would be to acknowledge special mercies, such as deliverance in travels, etc., etc. And then I write that today Christians don't practice this kind of sacrifice because they believe that Jesus Christ came to erase the need for offerings and sacrifices. So it goes a little bit farther into biblical integration than some might be willing to go, because I am talking about Jesus here, but I think that it's in a way that is just opening students' eyes to worldviews of others. I don't think it's too explicitly trying to be persuasive or anything like that. I'm just explaining that context. For the reading activity, they are just making a little Venn diagram comparing details and events that occur in the picture book, in the article, and in both. For this historical connection, I wanted to include this because both the paired article and the book actually discuss how women in World War I, as a part of the Salvation Army, used to cook donuts for soldiers. And so because both texts mentioned it, I wanted to bring in a primary source. So this is like a little newspaper page. I thought it was really cool. It's got pictures on there of the donuts, and I wanted them to just observe how that this source builds on the events from both the article and the book. For the writing activity, all they're doing is using that Venn diagram to compare and contrast in writing how the authors of the different texts presented the same topic. For the art activity, all they're doing is, we know that Hanson Crockett Gregory was credited for inventing the donut we know and love today. But if you were the one to invent the donut, what would it have looked like? What flavor would it be? Then they have a chance to draw that and explain their recipe over on the side. And then lastly, the thing I'm most out of my comfort zone about is their math activity. I have them doing a 6th grade standard of one-step equations. All they're doing is reading the word problem, writing an equation that can be used to solve the problem, and then they solve that and show their answer. So there's about 5 questions on here, and I have stuff like, how many donuts can you buy with $40 if 1 dozen costs $8? So those are all the activities I have included in my literacy bag. I did a little bit more than I guess we were required to do, but I really just wanted to have something that was complex enough for a 6th grade student to complete. So that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Thanks for watching.